In this video, I wanted to chronicle my experience living on the autism spectrum in the United States versus here in Sweden. Just as a heads up, this is a little bit longer of a video, so you might get you a cup of coffee and be prepared for that. On top of that, if you have any trigger issues regarding listening to discussions about mental health issues, maybe this is a video that you would click out of. Otherwise, let's get started. Why am I making this video? When I first started YouTube, I originally did it about 3.5 years ago, and I was kind of chronicling my experience living on the autism spectrum as an adult. And what I soon found was I enjoyed the fact that I was getting a lot of people thanking me for the content that I was putting out, and they had a lot of questions and that sort of thing. But I really didn't want to be defined by this diagnosis. Yeah, it is a part of me, but it's just one small part, and there's much more to me than just this diagnosis of being on the autism spectrum. Just like someone who has diabetes, they may have diabetes, it may be an important aspect of their life, but there's so much more to them than just that diagnosis. Another reason is I've been sort of in a funk lately, and a lot of it is just a symptom of being on the spectrum, and everything that I've been through for the last few years kind of has snowballed to the point where, I'm having a lot of the symptoms of just kind of sort of a burnout. And it's really hard to explain that to people in sort of an elevator speech, what this diagnosis means for me and why I behave in the way that I do or the way I interact with people. And I find it's a little bit easier for me to explain in a video platform such as this here. I also find that a lot of people think they know what autism is, but there's a lot of misinformation. And I personally have received a lot of comments to me that are a bit concerning because of what I think happens is people become echo chambers for misinformation. So they hear what they think is autism, and then because of that, they start to judge other people as being or not being on the autism spectrum. Just as it is with any other disease, there are people that get diabetes, and then people automatically think, oh, you ate too many donuts and sugar, and shame on you, and it's all your fault. So I felt it was really important to kind of clear up some of this misconceived ideas. So first off, let's talk about the confusion around the diagnosis. So one of the biggest issues, the differences of America and in Sweden, is actually kind of a negative towards Sweden. So Sweden is extremely advanced, especially when it comes to healthcare. I'm really impressed with them. But when it comes to the diagnosis of autism, they're a little bit behind America. So in America, they have actually done away with a term called Aspergers. Now, back in the day, I would not have been diagnosed as autistic. I would have been diagnosed as having Aspergers. But for some varying reasons, which I'm not going to get into, that's a whole nother video, they no longer use the word Aspergers as a diagnostic term. And in Sweden, they still say Aspergers. So in Sweden, many times if you say, oh, I'm on the autism spectrum, they automatically think of the very severe cases, people that cannot communicate, they have difficulties taking care of daily activities, that sort of thing. And so this has led to some interesting confrontations I've had. So I'll give you like one little example of something that happened to me. So when I first came to Sweden 2 years ago, I had a Swedish guy who I've become real good friends with who helped me out a whole lot coming into the system, He was my neighbor, and he invited me after I'd been in Sweden just like a week or two. He said, hey, we're going to go for barbecue and meet up with some of my friends. Do you want to go? I said, sure. So all his friends are in the 40s, 50s age bracket, and there was quite a few people there, and this gentleman comes up real well-dressed, clean-cut looking guy, and I've never met him before, and the first thing that comes out of his mouth, I don't know his name, he doesn't know my name, first thing he says is, who is she? And I'm like, so, I'm autistic, I'm very concrete in my thinking, and so it's hard for me to deal with like abstract speech, metaphoric speech, and I'm like, what do you mean? He's like, the girl. I'm like, what girl? And he's like, the reason you're here in Sweden. I'm like, oh, there is no girl. Well, then what are you here for? And he proceeded to grill me in this kind of a manner. So it was a very aloof, confrontational type of manner. And it was really putting me off. And what ended up happening is, in typical autistic fashion, I ended up info dumping and giving too much information about myself. So I try not to do that, but I felt kind of pressured and I was like in defense mode. And to be completely honest, I just wanted to get up and leave and go home, but I'm there with my friend and all of their other friends. And so I just felt like everybody was staring at me and I didn't want to cause a scene. And so and I don't remember exactly everything I said, but I remember I mentioned that, I am on the autism spectrum. And so I feel like I really feel more comfortable and I thrive here in Sweden for many reasons I'll get into in this video. And he jumped at me and was like, "You don't have autism. I work with autistic people and I know what autism is," and blah, 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 blah. And I'm just like, and he's like, "What do you think you're autistic for?" And I'm like, "I have a diagnosis." I didn't know what to do. So I was really disturbed and put off by that. I did not like him. And when I went home, I talked to his friend, my neighbor that had invited me originally, and I was like, "What's his deal?" And so after we talked about it, what I came to figure out is he did work in a healthcare setting around autistic people, but he's not a doctor, he's not a nurse, he's not a psychiatrist. He is, and I'm not going to say just a nurse's aide, because that's what I've been working as a nurse's aide, and you're not just a nurse's aide. But he hasn't received the education that would be required to be diagnosing people and treating them, that sort of thing. And even if he had been, even if you are a specialty in a certain field, it's always important to know that in healthcare, things are constantly being updated and changed, and it's good to stay up with information. And so apparently he worked in some sort of healthcare facility that took care of people that were very, very severe cases of autism. And in his mind, it seems like what I should have said was Aspergers, but me, I'm a very concrete thinker, and that's no longer the terminology used in America, so I'm going with autism because that's the up-to-date information. But apparently Sweden has not caught up to that, and a lot of people still know it by Aspergers, and in their minds, autism is the more classical autism. So in autism, in America now, there are now 3 categories of it. There's 1, 2, and 3. I fall into category 1, which is the least severe. There's a lot of different terminology that surrounds autism, and there's a lot of these words carry a lot of meaning to different people. People see these words through different filters and have different feelings about it. And so if you use one term, it seems like it offends one group. If you use another term, it offends another group. So like, for example, they call it high functioning. Well, some people get offended by that. They also call it mild autism. Well, some people get offended by that. Basically, it's like, for me, I don't like calling myself autistic. It's just that's the diagnostic term that's there. And I wish that we could come up with another word that would not create so much confusion. So whether it's in America or Sweden, I've had issues with it, but I feel like America, they're a little bit more up with this change than they are in Sweden. Now, in other ways, I think Sweden is a lot better when it comes to living with autism spectrum disorder. So, for example, it's a lot more calm here. You have better access to the outdoors, to nature, to going out to the sea and being able to kind of like calm down. I thrive in that kind of an environment. When I lived in Texas, you were very limited on that kind of stuff. The other thing is the pace of life in Texas was just so fast. I know when I go back on vacation, like the last time I went to Texas, after 3 days, I was like completely burnt out because it's just everything's moving too fast. The cars are too fast, the people are too fast, too much traffic, lots of stuff has to be crammed into like one day, and it was just too much for me. And in Sweden, it's a lot more laid back. Now, it's not like island time where it's how you say, like an island time, they say, hey, be at my house at 3 o'clock, and then it's like the next day, right? It's not like that. So they're very punctual. If they say it's at 9 o'clock, then it's at 9 o'clock and everybody's there on time. But it seems like there's not so much packed in one day, and things are a little bit more laid back in between those appointments. And Yeah, I just thrive a little bit better in that. I feel like it's a little bit more structured here in Sweden as well, which I kind of thrive better on structure. And yeah, also in the work environment, I worked in the intensive care in the United States for many years, and kind of I think that's a difficult, very difficult for anybody, let alone someone who's on the autism spectrum. But for me, I think what helped was when I started, I worked at nighttime, and it was neuro ICU, so it was people with brain issues, and a lot of them they were on ventilators, they were on sedation, and that sort of thing. And so I am a more mechanically minded type person when it comes to working in healthcare. I like problem solving. I like adjusting medication drips and seeing an instant result from that, and that sort of thing. But having to engage with people and talking from all these different backgrounds and stuff, it's not that I can't do it. It's more that it saps my battery, my social battery, a lot faster. And so people will say, "Oh, you look fine to me. You look normal." But they don't see me when I come home and I'm like in bed for the whole weekend trying to recover from, my social battery being completely zapped. But the work environment here in Sweden, you get breaks more often. The shifts are shorter. Most people work 8-hour shifts here as opposed to the 12, 13-hour shifts like I worked in America. You also get, it's not unusual to have a break every 2 or 3 hours. You get a nice lunch break. You get fika breaks, which is like a coffee break, and you hang out and just chit chat. There's a lot of small talk. The culture here is such that they don't like drama. They don't like rocking the boat, or when they have a lunch break, it's more very simple, light topics that they're talking about. What they did for the weekend. Their children, how they're doing, their pet dog, or whatever. It's not these heated debates about the president of the United States and religious debates and all this kind of stuff like I kind of dealt with when I was back in the States. In America, I remember working 13 hours and not being able to even get a lunch break sometimes. And you need a pee, but you had to like hold it and stuff like that. And it's not that way here in Sweden. They're much more geared towards you taking care of yourself, not just your patients. So that's really good. I also think that the mentality about mental health is a lot better here in Sweden than it is in the United States. So, for example, when I was younger and I first started having mental health issues, I was afraid to see a psychiatrist. I grew up in the Bible Belt, they call it in the United States. So it's not one particular religion. This is common among many religions in the States. And there's extremists in all religions. And it's not that I'm not a religious person. I am a religious person. I'm a spiritual guy. But there was a lot of very extreme attitudes about seeking mental help. Some people say you just pray it away, and that is something I tried to do, and I failed after many years of praying for it. I was made to feel that if I didn't feel better from praying and reading the Bible and doing everything I'm supposed to do, then there's something wrong with me, that I must be doing a sin against God or something like that. Otherwise, God would have helped me. Rather than looking at mental illness as it's a sickness just like the heart or your kidneys or anything else that needs medicine. It's the same thing with the brain. But in Sweden, it's not like that. I'm sure there may be some people here and there, some outliers. There's outliers everywhere and extremist people everywhere. But overall, I feel like, in Sweden, it's okay to say, I have bipolar disorder, or I have depression, or I have anxiety, or whatever. And people don't really treat you so differently for that. They still treat you with respect. And I have a theory about it. I wonder if it has something to do with the fact that here in Sweden, they are more private, and we have long, cold, dark winters. And so it's very easy for people to become isolated. And so maybe it's that they're more aware of that and they try to be more supportive. I'm not sure. That would be interesting to find out. Maybe you guys know out there, if you're watching and you're from Sweden, maybe you've got some good input on that. But another thing I heard growing up about seeing a psychiatrist was, or anyone in the mental health field, was they can put thoughts in your mind and control you. They can brainwash you. They'll hypnotize you and let the demons in your body and all this kind of stuff. So that was stuff that I grew up with, and around that in Texas. Everywhere in Texas, many religions, you hear that kind of stuff. So, yeah, so it's a lot better here when it comes to that regard. I don't want to paint a picture and say like everybody's like that in Texas. There's not. There's some, but I feel like it's more, that kind of an attitude is more common back home in Texas than it is in the States. I mean, than it is here in Sweden. So also, I said, in Sweden they're a little bit more private. That is true, and I've heard from people that come from collectivistic lands where you're used to doing things in big groups of people and they're very outgoing, such as in like certain of the Latin American lands or the United States. For many of them, it's very difficult coming to Sweden because people are so quiet and so private. You get on the bus, you don't talk to anybody, you save the seat next to you and leave it empty, unless it's extremely crowded. And that may seem very cold and harsh and unwelcoming. It's just the way things are here. It's just the culture here. And for me, I thrive in that because, for example, going to America, I can't tell you how many times, you get on an elevator, you're in the bathroom just trying to pee, and someone comes in and starts having a random conversation with you about Donald Trump being the president and what do you think about that or whatever, and I'm like, I don't know you. I'm never going to see you again. I'm just in here doing my business, or I'm going to, the elevator is going to go down in 5 seconds. Why are we having this conversation? And some people think that's wonderful and lovely and everything, that people are so friendly and talk about these things. But to be honest, for me as a person on the autism spectrum, it's very stressful. It's not that I don't want to talk to anybody, but it just drains me so much faster. Another thing here is there is better access to mental health. Or mental health treatment. So for example, in the United States, you have, if you don't have insurance, then you have to pay cash, and then healthcare becomes very expensive. So I remember when I first started working and my mental health was really bad, I got to a point where I was having a lot of really serious dark thoughts around the age of 22, and I didn't have the money to put myself through college, and I tried to take every kind of job there was to make the bills, to pay the bills and keep food in my stomach. And I remember making $6 an hour, which was just barely minimum wage, and then you got to pay tax out of that, and I had no health insurance, and that was a time that I really needed mental health treatment, and they're like, yeah, $75 for like a 45-minute session. Well, I don't have $75, and part of my stress was the financial situation, being able to keep food on the table. I remember I got so skinny, I was only 118 pounds. Divide that by 2.2, and that's what would be in kilograms. I can't do that off the top of my head just now, for those of you that don't use pounds. I mean, it was really bad. But then here in Sweden, it's paid for by the tax dollars, and everybody's got access to the healthcare. They may have to wait a little bit longer than some people, but it's better than no access at all, like in America, or you got access, but you just can't afford it, or you go into debt. Have to sell an arm and a leg to pay for your medical bills. I felt like I got a lot more bullying in the United States too, being on the autism spectrum. So for example, working in the healthcare field, I have tics, and I try to filter those out when I do videos and stuff like that, or when I'm around people, I try really hard to control it. But if I'm really, really stressed out, my tics get really, really bad. I have like this weird, some of my friends and family have called it my dance I do, where it's like I'm doing a jerking with my neck and my face twitching and all this kind of stuff. And so if I'm really, really stressed out, it gets stimulated and it gets really bad. And I'm able to perform and do what I need to do, but I guess it'd be like a person with Tourette syndrome, which is, it's not as severe as Tourette's. But I worked with some nurses that were older, and they were bullying me. Like one of them said to me, you need to stop doing that, meaning the twitching and the tics. She said, you're going to scare your patients. They're going to think you're not confident and you don't know what you're doing. Ironic thing, 14 years later, I'm still a nurse. I actually managed to get my nurse practitioner degree, or as they say in Swedish, it's a specialty nursing. I've got a certificate in diabetes, and I'm not trying to brag or anything, but just trying to show you that even with limitations, and some people may call it a handicap, it's amazing sometimes if you're really determined about something, how if you push yourself, sometimes you can achieve some amazing things. I've learned Swedish, and I don't think I'm fluent, but people tell me that I'm pretty much fluent. I got a long ways to go, like working on my accent and really fine-tuning it, but I'm also a bit of a perfectionist, so that's probably a problem there, why I don't think I'm fluent yet. But, I speak more Swedish than I speak English, and yeah. But I dealt with a lot of bullying in the workplace when I was in the United States. And then we also have a hierarchical structure in America, so I was really afraid of the doctors, and you're afraid of the hospital administration because it's a very like a pyramid type level, very hierarchical. And I know it wasn't just me. A lot of people were afraid of the doctors and other people in, say administration. But in Sweden, it's a very horizontal type structure. So you work more as a team. A doctor will have lunch with us. All of administration, we hang out, we treat each other as equals. And so it's really nice. And so that's another level of pressure that's been removed from me. So all in all, I think overall, except with the exception of the fact that Sweden just hasn't caught up with some of the diagnostic criteria, I think Sweden definitely is better for me personally, being on the autism spectrum. One other thing I'd like to say too is in both places, there has been an issue with people saying things like, well, you don't look autistic. And to that, I will say this. If you've seen one person with autism, you've seen one person with autism. We're all different. It's just like diabetes. And, there are people that in their mind, they have what a diabetic person looks like. They weigh a certain amount. They may have, an amputation. They may have, all certain types of features. But you can look up, there are people that compete in sports, like in the Olympics and other types of, I'm not a sports guy, but I did go on the internet and I was shocked at how many people that compete in sports, how many of them actually have type 1 or type 2 diabetes. And you wouldn't know it if it wasn't written down somewhere, or they hadn't said it, or it wasn't on, you saw them giving themselves some medication. So there's people that walk around with these conditions like me with autism, and you only see them one certain way. I talked with a gentleman who is Swedish and is one of the subscribers here on this channel, and I have to thank him because I was feeling very frustrated because of hearing that statement of, well, you don't look autistic. And I was taking it in a very negative way, like they don't believe me or whatever. And so he said, it's probably misdirected kindness. I'm like, what do you mean? And he's like, if I remember exactly how he said it, basically, they're just trying to make me feel normal. Like, you seem fine to me, you're okay with me, don't worry about it. And when I heard it from that perspective, I really like that. I think that's a more positive way to look at that and not have to be like, get all bent out of shape or stressed out because, people are saying you look fine to me. Because originally what it was doing is felt like it was invalidating, I may be fine at work or look fine to you, but then I come home and I'm in bed and I can't do anything because I'm completely zapped. Like a couple weeks ago, I went to a convention on the weekend. It was like a 6-hour convention, and for 3 days afterwards, I had pain all over my body and I couldn't get out of bed. I could barely get out of bed to take a shower and cook some food. And so yeah, people don't see that side of it. I try really hard I do a lot of what they call masking. So it's like I try to be at my very best because I know it's like to say for every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. And I've just learned that through my life, through experiences of reacting to something and then having negative reaction to that. and you're like, well, that doesn't work, let's try something else. And so people say things like, oh, just be yourself. But the reality is, if you're yourself as an autistic person, many times people will be repulsed by that. And I think there's a balance. I think we kind of have to meet somewhere in the middle. I think it's good for people to understand that are not on the autism spectrum, that there are people that are different and think differently, and we shouldn't be quick to judge them and think that if a person acts a certain way, that automatically makes them a bad person, that they're not trying, or that they have a bad attitude, whatever. I think it's good to give people the benefit of the doubt and realize maybe they're having an off day, they just don't feel well, maybe they're going through something. I mean, it's different if it's like the person is hurting you. That's a whole nother story, right? But if they look a certain way, or they use a certain tone of voice, or have some strange mannerisms or something, it may be something that they're dealing with. And then on the other end too, I don't think it's realistic for those of us that have a condition such as like autism spectrum disorder or bipolar or whatever, to expect every single human being to learn about every single mental condition and health condition and cater to that, because it's not realistic. I think it's the same thing as we have to look at other people that don't have a condition and look at them as to their motives that kind of give them the benefit of the doubt as well. So I feel like we kind of have to meet somewhere in the middle. And I think that's something that both in the United States and in Sweden, we're kind of on equal footing in that area, that we can be a little bit better in that regard. So that's kind of my experience living on the spectrum here in Sweden. Like I said, this is a very long video. Sorry for that. If you got any questions, feel free to put that down in the comment section. Have an awesome rest of your day.